going to do my best Saturday Night Live impression. It's live from WABE Studios, Political Breakfast. We are so happy and excited to be here. We've been chatting and just really excited about this for weeks now, just to bring what we do in the tiny studios that we record in to you live, and so at such a critical juncture in this political season. So you know Brian Robinson, our Republican strategist. Please give him a warm welcome this morning. Tharon Johnson, our Democratic strategist. So let the conversation begin. And we were just chatting and just wondering, how many people in this room, how many of you have voted already?
Yeah, I figured.
How many of you are those undecideds that we have been talking about the past week or so? No hands up. One person. So what does that maybe indicate to you, Brian, heading into the 6 days to this election? Trying to close in here.
Well, what that shows me is this is a self-selected audience of people who love politics and are engaged and they know what they believe and probably made their minds, probably never had to think about what they wanted to do. They knew what they wanted to do. And, I think one of the greatest questions of this campaign and this election will be those people who, back in the first part of the year, we called the double haters. This is when Joe Biden was still in there. We're hearing much less about, we're not hearing that phrase anymore, not just because I'm saying it less. I'm hearing it less from the people that I kind of stole the idea from. That, people, you saw, Tharon and I did an event in Orlando in the summer, right, with a industry group. And at that time, I was like, look, the double haters are going to decide this election. You've got approval ratings for Trump and Biden that are in the mid-30s and disapproval ratings that approach 60% both. The most negatively seen candidates going into a general election in the history of America. What's happened this fall is that's changed dramatically. Their fave-unfaves have kind of like reverted to partisan norms. We've all kind of like gone to our tribal corners, and like Republicans who didn't like Trump are now saying in polling that they're okay with him, and Democrats who didn't really know much about Kamala Harris at large. Certainly people like y'all probably did, Tharon certainly did. But for the average voter, Kamala Harris was an unknown quantity, and she had to get over that bar as somebody, since Gerald Ford, the first ever candidate to be a major party nominee without really winning a primary. She had to get over that bar of credibility, and with Democratic partisans, she certainly did that. I mean, you can see it in the numbers. They had very low. She didn't have high approval even with Democrats, and now she does. So I'm glad to see to some degree that we're not having an election determined by the double haters. But one thing that's going to be fascinating to watch in Georgia is how many people go in and skip the first line because they don't want either one of them. It was a significant number in 2020, a number big enough to have cost Trump the election. You add to that Republicans were 30,000 Republicans who voted in the Republican primary in 2020 didn't vote in the general at all, partly because their nominee was telling them that absentee voting and early voting was bad. So they just didn't vote at all, right? Again, 30,000 votes, that's enough to cover that margin. So that skip the line vote is going to be something. I don't know how decisive it's going to be, but if we have a 12,000 vote margin again, which I don't think we will this time, but nobody thought we were last time either, I think that those skip the line people will be very, very influential. So maybe at the end of the day, I'll be right that the double haters do in fact get to determine who wins Georgia.
Tharon, let's get you in on this. 3.2 million have already gone to the polls. What are you hearing within the Democratic Party about what that says in terms of, I don't know, heading towards in favor of Harris or Trump at this point?
Well, I let B-Rob off the hook on Monday. We were in front of a bunch of Atlanta Rotarians, and if any Rotarians in the room, we like to be peaceful and respectful to people. But for those of you who actually listen to the podcast, you may remember B-Rob predicted that the turnout was going to be low. All right, I predicted that the turnout was going to be high. And here's a little kind of behind-the-scenes sort of methods that we use and data. One could have made the argument, Lisa, that there was a huge level of apathy out there because folks didn't necessarily feel comfortable about the candidates. We were hearing out of 350 million people in this country, these are the two best people we can get. And we were talking about Joe Biden and Donald Trump. But how many of you all remember what happened on July 21st? On July 21st, something changed in this country. You had a sitting president, Joe Biden, say, I'm going to step out of this race and do what's best for my country and my party. And then he did something that a lot of Democrats were hoping he would do, but weren't sure. And that is say, I'm going to endorse Vice President Kamala Harris to be the nominee. Immediately, you saw droves of elected officials, former presidents, members of Congress, labor leaders, people in the environmental community, all these folks, identity, politics groups, people who for women's rights, social justice, LGBTQ groups. All rallied behind her. And Lisa, I was very concerned going into the convention that we were going to have some pushback, some opposition. But I'm very proud of the Democrats, and I'm very proud of this coalition that Kamala Harris has been able to build, because while we still had debate, people had an opportunity to voice their concerns about the process. We came out of that convention united. Now let's get to Georgia. I'm very, very optimistic about the numbers for a couple reasons. One, Democrats, we got to stop acting like we didn't win in 2020. We elected a president, we elected 2 U.S. senators, and we sent all of our Democratic members back to Congress. And we picked up some seats in the state house, in the state senate. Now, we didn't have as much gain that we thought we were going to have on the state level. So I just want us to change our way of thinking. Like, we are on offense. Like, we are defending champions when it comes to presidential election year turnout. Now, 2022, different story. I'm sure B-Rob is going to go there in a minute. But if you look at presidential election turnout, if you look at the model, you look at sort of where we're tracking, Lisa, we talked about this before we started taping. We're 1% higher than where we were 4 years ago. Now, let me also preempt what B-Rob is going to say. I looked at it this morning. Black vote is at 26%. I would love for it to be 27, 28, 29. I am like jumping off the roof because it's just not mathematically possible for her to lose Georgia, her being the vice president. At 26, if it stays there, I'm okay. But the biggest thing that Democrats are looking at, Lisa, is the unorthodox turnout amongst white Republican voters over the age of 50. Historically in this state, this is how you would win elections. And I can't believe I'm about to say this. I've been doing campaigns in Georgia now for 22 years. My first big state break around the state of Georgia was in 2002 when I managed Labor Commissioner Michael Thurman's campaign. That year was a very pivotal year, and it was a big year for Republicans because that's when Sonny Perdue beat incumbent Roy Barnes. But historically, Lisa, for 20 years, roughly, up until about 2020, Republicans always had a surge on election day. Democrats, we wanted you to vote early. Absentee, that was really the Christian coalition. That was Ralph Reed. You will always see these mysterious hundreds of thousands of absentee ballots just appear on election day, many of whom were from rural counties and Republicans. What the Republicans are doing now is, and I think it has a lot to do with what Brian Kemp, Kelly Loeffler, Speaker Burns, Burt Jones, they're saying go now. And so they're cannibalizing the Republican base, and we're seeing these numbers sort of be driven up by that race. Now, a lot of those folks, I looked at the numbers, roughly about 85 to 90% of them were going to vote either early on election day, period. Here's what you got to look at, and you know where I'm going, Lisa, the demographic that we always talk about every single election, and that is the young vote, 18 to 29. I want that number to be a little higher because I believe that the Harris-Walz campaign has closed better with them than the Republicans. So we're feeling good. We're feeling like, some of the Democratic counties are going up. Republican counties are where they should be. But I think ultimately you wouldn't have the vice president now maybe coming back to the state once. I'm hearing it maybe twice. If she did not think that there was a pathway to victory for her to win here.
Yeah, and Trump as well, been here, twice in 1 week. Gone are the days where people talk about their politics, right? Everywhere you go, the grocery store, schools, people are talking about the polls, the polling. Here's what the polls are saying. I feel good because the polls are indicating this and that. But Brian, this week on Political Breakfast, you said something interesting. Those national polls don't really matter at this juncture.
No.
Can you delve into that a bit?
Let's not forget, in 2016, Hillary Clinton went into Election Day with a pretty strong lead in national polling. And it doesn't matter. Because, let's say Kamala Harris gets every single vote in California. She still gets the same number of electoral votes from California, right? So what matters is the polling, and well, even now, polling doesn't matter now. It's the election day vote that matters. But Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Arizona, Wisconsin, Nevada, look at what's happening in those states and look at trend lines there. Let's look at Georgia. The trend lines here have shown a super tight race. And in recent weeks, we've seen in polling, like the UGA poll that came out that has Trump up with a 4-point lead just outside of the margin of error. I do just feel in my bones that that's accurate. It's really hard to take any one poll and be like, this is what it is. It's so hard to find voters. It's so hard to predict what the electorate is going to be, particularly in a state like Georgia, where we're growing so much. There are 600,000 more people on the rolls today than there were in 2020. So what are those people doing? Are they active voters, or are they just registered because they got a driver's license and everybody here is registered to vote? So I don't know exactly what's happening in those other swing states. I'm not an expert on them. I don't pretend to be. But I did get a debriefing with the Trump campaign on Monday, and they were very confident about Georgia. They felt very good about where they were. And look, and these are professionals. These aren't activists. These aren't people who kind of go with their heart. These are like hardened, crusty political operatives, and they are like, we're seeing the stuff come in. We know who these voters are. We're winning. And you're seeing massive turnout in rural counties. And, like some of the urban counties doing, like DeKalb's, the turnout's doing fine. But let me go to what Tharon was talking about with the racial breakdown of the vote. And this has changed somewhat. But Democrats win in Georgia with the 30-30 rule. They need the electorate to be 30% black and to get 30% of the white vote. And in the last generation, they haven't been able to get that 30% of the white vote. When I was Governor Deal's communications director in 2014 and that reelect, we probably got 80% of the white vote and won by 7 points. So Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff got to the U.S. Senate because they did way better than that with white voters, and black voters turned out in huge numbers and they did their jobs. So we're not seeing that level of enthusiasm in this election necessarily. That 26%, if I'm a Democrat operative, is a red flashing light to me. Mm-hmm. And we saw some days this week where the black vote on a given day in early voting was down to 20%. That's got to be highly concerning. We will see. Tharon's got a theory here that I think is plausible, and it just depends on the voters doing their jobs. But at this juncture, like Republicans just to be like, yeah, we're a little behind in early voting. Who cares? We're going to crush it on election day. Tharon used the word cannibalizing. What he means by that, and he's right, is a lot of that election day vote for the Republicans now already in the bank. Now, that's good news for Republicans because they don't have to worry about somebody getting sick or getting a flat tire or it's raining, so I don't want to bother with it, or there's long lines. So Republicans feel good about having those votes banked. So Democrats at this juncture at a place where they've got to have a huge election day or this thing's over. And I will say, going back to that little debrief with the Trump campaign, I'm not an expert on those other states, but they were telling me they think they're going to win 6 of the 7 swing states. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but I heard that consistently from numerous of these guys who are some number crunchers. So that's a big prediction. If that's the case, this thing's going to be over. But even then, going back to the original question, if Trump wins 6 of those 7 swing states, he's going to win some of them by razor-tight margins. He won Arizona and Georgia Biden won Arizona and Georgia last time by 12,000 votes. So he could still lose the popular vote and win the Electoral College by a fairly significant margin. And I will close with this. I hope we're not at 12,000 votes. I honestly don't even care so much about who wins Georgia as that we don't have a razor thin margin. Mm-hmm. The people who work in elections, some of them are friends of mine. These are people I care about. And I really do fear for their lives if there is a 12,000 vote margin. I fear for the lives of Fulton County and DeKalb County election workers because I think Republicans will be upset with them. Some activists would be upset with them. But I also worry about the Republican leadership. If Either way, if it's close, I do think that there will be a Democratic backlash if it's a 12,000 vote margin for Trump too.
Is that your take? Are Democrats in a pickle at this point?
No. Listen, again, look at how I started off my conversation, right? We are the defending champs when it comes to presidential election turnout. The number of black voters, and it interests me when B-Rob, you guys hear him on the podcast, he always talk about what black men are thinking. I'm like, hello, I'm over here, I'm a black man. I can tell you what they're thinking.
And then he pivots to what white women are going to do. So
I'm getting there. I'm getting there.
Right.
That's my favorite group. But no, but when Republicans are looking at black voter turnout, and they've been doing it for decades in this state, it, to me, and I'm not accusing Brian of this, right? But one thing that's happened in this election is that there's apathy on both sides. There are a lot of people who have not voted yet, Lisa, not because they're undecided, but they're unmotivated. They're not motivated to go out and believe in the process. And I think that I go back to what Kamala Harris has done. Love or hate her, if you guys listen to the podcast, I go back to July 21st because I remember vividly a month before that, I was on this podcast defending against Brian while this woman was totally qualified to be vice president. I had black women calling me saying, thank you for standing up for her, because Republicans were talking about her laugh. They were talking about this awkwardness. They were saying that she was uneducated. And those things are still happening today. This just happened yesterday. She's evil. She's anti-Christ. Yesterday, called her stupid. I mean, this is not my word. These are Trump words. These are words of people. And I won't even get into the comedian in New York, right, and what he said. And so I think that black voters are going to probably stay in that 26 to 27 range, honestly, because like every demographic group, right, they're coming out and I think they're going to have a big day on election day. So we're not in a pickle, Lisa. The key to winning Georgia, and I've said this before, it's about building the right coalition. So here you go, B-Rob. I'm always going to have faith in my college-educated, disaffected Republicans, suburban white women. And they are very quiet this time. 2020, I couldn't go in the grocery store. I would see people in Ubers, at events, and they would tell me, I am not voting for that crazy man. That's what they would say to me. He is destructive. He's destroyed this country. And they reminded me, Lisa, of how badly he handled COVID-19. We were in the middle of a deadly pandemic, and had he shown just a little bit of empathy, I think it could have gotten better. So I think that those same women are looking at their choices. And you got a clear choice, you all. And I'm so proud of the vice president, because her going to the Ellipse and having that speech last night, first of all, shout out to the presidential advance team, like Brian and his people that he talked to. I talked to a lot of people on the Harris campaign. They not only think they're going to win Georgia, they're going to win Pennsylvania, they're going to win Wisconsin. I think Nevada and Arizona are probably going to be an election night surprise. And of course, everybody's looking at what's going to happen in Michigan. And so they did a great job of creating the backdrop, totally different than what we experienced on January 6th. And I have to get this in. And I asked Dennis O'Hare for permission because he's a very private person. But for those of you all who have been listening to this podcast for a very long time, one of the most memorable moments for me on the podcast is when Brian and I were at our homes. Dennis was here in the studios, and we came onto the podcast that day like we do every Monday, and we're just going to talk about why Trump lost, why Biden won, what's going to happen with Warnock and Ossoff now that they have elected, and we had our talking points ready. But what we did not know at the time, and I think, Lisa, you were here too, is that there was an insurrection that was being amplified and instigated by he was still the president at the time, and was encouraging his supporters to go and fight, right? Inciting a riot, an insurrection, versus what you heard this woman, who I think is going to be the next president of the United States, was to make a pledge to the middle. She said, hey, Republicans, even if you don't vote for me, I still would love to listen to you and make sure you're heard. But she said something else, Lisa, that I think that this room, to me, demonstrates why this Political Breakfast podcast is so needed. She said that Donald Trump has spent the last decade telling us how bad we are to each other, making us afraid of each other, right? And feeling like we have to be in this defensive posture. So I'll tell you, Brian, clearly, I don't hate Republicans. I'm not afraid of Republicans, and I think they shouldn't be of Democrats. But I do think that we got to have a very uncomfortable conversation about some very important issues. And so, no, we're not in a pickle. I think Kamala Harris is doing everything she can. Tim Walz is doing everything they can. I really honestly believe that there are a lot of white women who have gone into those election voting places. And I don't have to remind this group, right? I can see some sisters and some other, white sisters, Asian sisters, Latino sisters looking at me. Voting is a private matter. And I think that they're going to shock their spouses. I think they're going to go in there in a private way and vote for sanity. They're going to vote for a future that is bright for them. And I know we're going to talk about this later, but I truly believe, and as a man, we got to say this, reproductive freedom. Whether you are pro-life or not, you have a daughter, you have an aunt, you have a cousin, you have a grandchild who may experience something. So this election for me, Lisa, is more about the future than it's ever been. And the reason why I'm so passionate about it, the reason I'm going to battleground states and knocking on doors, is because I remember that day I had to come on the podcast with Brian, and I woke up the next morning after being in New York, and I thought I was going to see a glass ceiling break with Hillary Clinton, and it didn't happen. So all the Obama alumni, we're doing everything we can. So no, we're okay. But let's say this really quickly, because Brian did go a little long. Y'all see now, I had to sit here and wait. I think if you had a timer, it's been even.
I do time them. I'm like,
yeah.
Okay.
The coalition in Georgia in 2020, it was really simple. We wanted rural voters we wanted to do better in rural areas than we did before in 18. So we know we were going to lose. We just wanted to lose by less. We really focused on the suburban areas, and we had high turnouts at the metro. I think if you look at those just fundamentals of this race, those things are still happening. But again, I led off by saying that I think the early vote numbers from Republicans, it's got to kind of fizz out, and I need to see growth amongst Democratic counties. And I think ultimately, B-Rob is right. It's election day. And last thing I would say, guys, I agree with him. I think that how we conduct ourselves after this election as Americans is going to be just as important as how we go and vote. We cannot have another scene and full of lies. We talk about Ruby Freeman and the two women who now, I guess Giuliani did turn over his penthouse and his stuff to them. But Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman, I want to call their names. Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman, literally lives will never be the same because of what the Republicans did after the election 4 years ago.
You mentioned Tim Walz a moment ago, and Brian, I want to get you in the conversation here. The running mates at this point, what is their role, and are they helping or are they hurting in the race so far?
The VP candidates historically don't mean much of anything. I do think that on the margins with J.D. Vance, he did a better job of explaining Trumpism to those disaffected Republicans than Trump does. Mm-hmm. When you talk about those college-educated, Tharon talks about college-educated white women in the suburbs. I will say, I will add to that, it's also college-educated white males in the suburbs. Like my buddies, they aren't crazy about what they hear from Trump. Most of them are voting for him, but it's not enthusiastically. A lot of the noise around him, they react the way anybody else does. But they are Republicans, and for many of them, and this has been true for many of those Republican women who did vote for Biden in 2020. I do not know why. I would love to dig in on why. But a lot of them right now, in the feedback I'm getting anecdotally, and I try to avoid talking about anecdotes, what somebody in the grocery store tells me. I try to really focus on what we see in the data, because my focus group and Tharon's focus group are not representative of the whole electorate. The people that we come into contact with are different than the electorate as a whole. My friends, one day on the podcast, or it was either on the podcast or right after, Tharon's like, why is everybody talking about how the economy's bad? My buddy's on his stock trading app, and he's doing great. And I was like, yeah, your buddy's not the guy I'm talking about. That guy's doing fine, right? If you, for a certain segment of Americans, the economy's great. But Atlanta had some of the highest inflation in the entire country. And that goes out into the suburbs and the exurbs, and is beginning to squeeze people's budgets. Just before we started, the third quarter economic index came out. 2.8% growth in this economy. That's strong. That's kind of where you want the nation to be. And one thing that we said at the end of 2023 was, before the whole Biden thing blew up, like, if we are hitting those sort of numbers, by the middle of 2024, Joe Biden's going to be in really good shape to be reelected. Well, we did have those numbers. And so really by the summer, I was like, well, it's 50-50, but economies, we've had a soft landing, the economy's doing great. I do think it's going to be enough to give Biden this marginal win, and it just never happened. And I think what happened in 2024 is some of what I missed in 2016. I think Trump was tapping into this feeling of being left behind economically, this feeling that America was stronger when I was younger than it is now, that my future isn't as bright as I once thought it was going to be. I did not see that on my street. I did not see that in my peer group, but it was out there and he saw it. And I think there's got to be some of that element happening here. Everybody has a job. Like when my old boss got elected in 2010 as governor, we had a 12% unemployment rate. We had foreclosure signs all over Georgia. Y'all remember all the plowed red clay fields where subdivisions were supposed to go, and they sat there for years. It was dark, dark times. We're not there. That's not where America is right now. But there is a certain segment that feels like all the prosperity isn't coming to them. And both candidates are trying to speak to that person. And I think the person with a message that penetrates with that voter is going to be the one that wins. Because that voter isn't necessarily a high information voter. That doesn't mean they're stupid. That doesn't mean they're dumb. It doesn't mean they're low educated. It just means maybe they have better things to do than keep up with politics. Maybe they're at soccer practice till 8 p.m. every night, right? There's many reasons why you'd be a low information voter. But if the speech at the McCamish Pavilion by Trump or the speech on the elliptical by Kamala Harris, if those penetrate to those voters, that's going to be the person who wins. Everything that I am seeing, and I'm trying to be as objective as I can, everything I'm seeing is voters are saying, by very marginal numbers, but enough to win, I was better off 4 years ago when Trump was president. I was better off at least in 2019 before COVID hit when he was president than I have been under the Biden years. And that's a really hard, it is shocking to me that it's as hard for Kamala Harris to make that argument as it has been. I thought it would be easier than it was. And it just shows that people are still feeling squeezed, despite the fact that many Americans are doing great.
These are the closing days of the campaign. What kind of Democratic movement are we going to see here in Georgia, Tharon?
And I cut my story short, Lisa, because I can feel when you're looking at me to wrap it up. But the reason I mentioned Dennis O'Hare, and again, I asked for permission. I'm going to go back to this. It was what happened on January 6th, where Dennis said, enough is enough. This is a white male who was a well-respected journalist in this state for many, many decades. And he said this to us, that what he saw, predominantly, by a group of white men, going to the Capitol and attacking the most sacred ground that we have as a nation and creating insurrection. I think that what Kamala Harris did last night, she spoke to the Dennis O'Hares of the world. So go back to what B. Rob said. I don't know Dennis's political affiliation. He's never. I think I can take an educated guess.
Yeah, I think I can take it.
But my point is, there are a lot more Dennis O'Hares. So this is how we close, Lisa. To your point, I'm so proud of Kamala Harris for a lot of reasons. I've actually spent time with her. I've said this on the podcast. Every time you met her, even before she became a U.S. Senator, while she was an Attorney General, she's so welcoming. How are your kids? How are you doing? My son Tyson got a chance to meet her. I know Quinn met President Trump, right? And seeing your child meet a vice president, former president, soon to be woman president. I'm a claimant. It was just something that was very gratifying for me as a father and as a black man, right? For my son to see a black woman with the flags next to her, taking a picture with him, and she's asking him how she's doing. So I just think that this big bad wolf woman that they wanted her to be, Lisa, they haven't done that, right? I mean, the most that they can say about her is, again, she's a devil, she's Antichrist, she's lying. I mean, so he's not closing the campaign well. I can't tell you what his message is other than I want to deport every undocumented person in America and 11 million people, right, roughly. He doesn't even tell you how he's going to do it, right? And so the biggest difference, Lisa, that you don't see in the Democratic Party that you've seen in the Republican Party, and we one thing about being in my business, I get clients three ways. One, straight up RFP. Somebody say, send me a proposal. We do the proposal. Many of you all here, I'm sure we all like respond to proposal, get grants. Second way you develop business as someone who say, hey, you know what, I really want to recommend you for this job. And the third way I get business is that a client that I actually served will say, hey, you know what, I heard you had a problem at the Capitol and you need a good lobbyist to go in and get your legislation due. I'm going to recommend this person. That's how you get hired, right? Some people, I'm sure there's other ways, but that's the fundamentals. Donald Trump, no one wants to hire this guy. All of his people who actually have worked for him, upwards to 200, have come out and said he should not be president. And his own vice president, who we thought was going to be in the White House to bring a level of levity, right? To be saying, he almost let this man get killed. And he refused to endorse him. Not only that, he ran against him. So I don't know about you all, but 200 plus people can't be all wrong about what they've done while being with this person in that job. Now, you may have some haters. You may have somebody who feels like DEI took over and you got a job over there. You may have some people that feel like, you know what, had he not known Lisa Ram and they didn't go to high school together or they weren't in the same sorority, she would have never got that job. That happens. But not everybody, an overwhelming majority of people who work with you, who know you. And I think the biggest thing that's missing, I'm hearing from a lot of people, and Brian and I worked together on Monday, the Reagan white male Republicans, the Bush Republican, they're not voting for this guy. They're not. Now, I'm going to go back to something B-Rob said early on, and we're going to make bold predictions on this podcast. I do think he's right. People are going to leave it blank, and there are going to be a lot of names written in. One lady in this state has already told you what she's going to do when she go vote, and that's Marty Kemp. What does she say? I'm going to write my husband's name in. And I believe that white woman when she tells me that she's going to write her husband's name in. So the undervote is because, look, and it happened in with Herschel and Warnock. There were a lot of what we call Warnock-Kemp voters. People could not get it in their head to vote for Herschel Walker, so they voted for Warnock, or they skipped that race. And so I think what we got to do, Lisa, is exactly what the campaign has been doing. Look, let's just give some numbers. Over 50,000 volunteers, 250 paid people on the ground. She's spending $27 million on television. 8 million more, 7 million more than what Donald Trump has spent on television. Now, you can't even buy no more TV in Atlanta. It's all gone. Yeah. She's got the more route. And I'm gonna play with Brian a little bit, He went to a rally. I went to a rally. I say, hey, man, my rally more crunk than your rally, right? And he's like, yeah, my rally built up over time. I'm like, well, when we were out in Clarkston, baby.
We didn't have Bruce Springsteen either.
Yeah, but if you just look at the momentum rallies, Lisa, people starting in this room, people have already voted. I just think that everything, if you just look at the fundamentals of this race, disaffected Republicans covering her waist, the money, $1 billion is going to go down in history. So I just think that I wanted to start to tell that story with Dennis, and I've been saving it because I wanted to make sure that I understood. But mark my word, what the vice president did last night in Washington, D.C. with tens of thousands of people, and the way she spoke to the American folks and told her what her plan was, told her what she wants to do. She reached out. She even said I would hire Republicans. That's how Nathan Deal won. That's how kind of Brian Kemp won. In private rooms, Brian Kemp will go sit with a bunch of black men and have a Budweiser. I think that's his favorite drink. He likes to drink Budweiser. Yeah, he'll go drink a Budweiser with you, right? Now, he's still going to go over here and do things that you may not like, but he's reaching out to the other side. He's expanded the electorate. And I think that's the biggest difference. Donald Trump is not doing anything but trying to motivate his base off fear. And he's trying to divide us. He wants us to hate each other. He wants us to hate immigrants. He wants us to hate LGBTQ people. And the last thing I would say is this, Lisa. Driving over here this morning, NPR, shout out to NPR, there was a story that played. I think some of you all probably heard this, about Head Start. And I know we have some teachers in the room. Right? I know some of you all personally. Head Start. I see my good friend Frank, right? What the Biden administration is saying is we need to pay Head Start's teachers more. So they put a plan forward that will give $10,000 more and will put money into the pockets of Head Start teachers because many of these women and men have to work 2 and 3 jobs to survive. But as a dad who has a 4-year-old, Head Start is so important to me right now. And so when Trump was asked, what would he do? Well, we're just going to leave it up to the states. And I'm going to mention these two, this number and this word, right? Project 2025. If you guys haven't done so already, I know this is a very educated group. Go look up that Project 2025. And there's one little small bullet point in there where they said they will basically eliminate Head Start. And so those are the things that I think that Biden is doing, along with Harris, where I think the American people who are fathers and mothers and who have young children, when you hear that, hey, we want to pay our workers, our teachers more so they can actually feel good about their jobs, feel like they're being valued, and that they know that they're the most noble workers in this country. And there's nothing more noble than a teacher to me, personally. I mean, law enforcement, firefighters are great, but being a teacher, I mean, we all remember how a teacher impacted our lives. So I just think that those type of things we got to close on. I think that those unmotivated voters are going to look at those two websites, look at those two platforms, and I think that's how she's going to win this race.
Can I circle back to your last question real quick? We're talking about the vice presidents, and I'll make this really quick. If Kamala Harris wins, I'm sorry, strike that. If Kamala Harris loses Pennsylvania, when the other choice was Josh Shapiro, the very popular governor of Pennsylvania, Tim Walz will go down through no fault of his own. This is not a personal attack on him. It has nothing to do with how he's done his job as a candidate. But he will go down as the most consequentially bad choice for vice president in the history of the republic. Because I do believe that Josh Shapiro would have been decisive. And, Tharon and I, you can hear, like, when it comes down to, like, how things going, what the patterns mean, we agree on a lot of it. Obviously, the huge difference is he thinks that Kamala's going to have a huge election day that gets Democrats over the top for all of the reasons that he stated. I think the Republicans have banked their votes and they're going to win this thing. So we obviously, one of us is wrong and one of us is right on that. But I do think Trump's going to win Georgia. And if it comes down to Pennsylvania, all of a sudden that Josh Shapiro non-pick just seems like outrageously bad as a decision in this campaign.
Real quick, Lisa, I had to push back on that because I actually know Governor Shapiro personally. When he was running for governor while being attorney general, he came to Georgia a lot, raised money, and he was just in Columbus, Georgia, campaigning for the Harris Walz ticket. I talked to him, and what he wanted me to tell all of you all is that, yes, he would have loved to have been vice president, right? And look at what Republicans are doing. They're trying to create this dissension. Oh, he didn't pick Josh Shapiro. I mean, she didn't pick Josh Shapiro, so now all of a sudden she's going to lose. What I would tell you that Josh Shapiro told me, he's doing everything he can as governor right now to deliver Pennsylvania for her. I think the Walz pick was a good pick, but we don't even have enough time because Lisa got the paper right now to talk about J.D. Vance. You talking about a failure to launch. You talking about a guy who gets announced and start attacking women, calling them childless cat ladies, and all the tape that surfaced. And this is a guy who literally was against Donald Trump, but then because of future political gains, now he loves the guy. I don't know about you all, but Brian knows this. If somebody talks bad about me or not my friend, unless it's got to be a really, really great opportunity, I'm probably just going to decline that job respectfully to work with them because you have shown me who you truly are. I think that J.D. Vance is going to be consequential to the campaign. He has not added any value to the Trump team other than in Ohio. So I just want to make sure that we don't allow Republicans to create this dissension. I think Shapiro is doing everything. He's going to be a hero, Lisa. She will win Pennsylvania because of her messaging, because of her candidacy. And I think Josh Shapiro is going to be celebrated because he is going to have to drag over the top. We had a great mayor of Philadelphia there as well, and Sherrill. And they tell me that they're peaking at the right time in that pivotal state.
Norm Ritchie has a question for either Tharon or Brian. Norm, stand and let's hear your question.
My man, Norm.
So first of all, I want to thank y'all for what you do. It's always a very informative show each week when we get to listen to it.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I am glad that we all agree that the Falcons are giving us a lot of fun this year.
Absolutely.
5-3.
But my question is for Brian. Brian, I know you are convinced that the recent election law changes have not had any negative effect. In fact, you had a little snarky water bottle comment in the most recent episode.
Absolutely.
I will tell you about one sliver, and it's a small sliver probably, but a meaningful one, and that's out-of-state college students.
Right.
There is no question, because I have to,
Yeah.
that the ballots came out later than they needed to by state law. The overseas ballots came out weeks before. I spent $140 on overnight mail on my 2 kids, there and back. I got my son's yesterday. So not everyone can do that.
No.
And I'm hand delivering those ballots today because there's not a drop box within 5 miles of me, even though there's an early voting location right down the street that I voted at. And I'm afraid that some of your fellow Republicans, if they saw me putting 2 ballots in a drop box, there's no telling what movie would be made about that. So I have a flexible job. I can go between 8:30 and 5 to the county office, sign an affidavit, which is what I have to do today. I found out. All of that was targeted at out-of-state college kids who probably are going to lean Democrat. So I would like to hear your defense of the election law that you have said has no impact.
Well, my defense is the empirical evidence that we've continued to have record-breaking turnout ever since we had that election law put in. And when it comes to the absentees, part of the issue, and this wasn't so much true in 2021 when we passed it, but the Atlanta Postal Service has stopped working in the last couple of years.
DeJoy,
What?
Under Louis DeJoy.
Under the Biden administration, as Senator Ossoff, he acknowledges there's a problem. I acknowledge there's a problem with the postal system. I don't think that. Look, you have time to get your kids' votes in now. I don't know when they came out. They should come out in plenty of time if you order your absentee ballot early. There's plenty of time to get in. And look at the evidence. They're pouring in, and we've reverted back to kind of absentee ballot norms as opposed to what we had in 2020, which is obviously an outlier for the COVID reasons. Where I share your concerns, where I will give credence to your concerns, is during a 3-week runoff. It is very difficult to finalize an election, get it certified, get a new ballot printed, send it out of state, and get it back, particularly with the Postal Service being as bad as it is right now in Metro Atlanta. So I would be open to doing something for out-of-state and people who are overseas military, certainly, to accommodate those needs. But does that represent a massive problem? No, it doesn't. Again, as evidenced by the empirical data that we have, that everybody's getting to vote. We do surveys of Georgia voters, and no one is saying, "Oh, God, it was so hard. I mean, I really had to jump through a bunch of hoops." No one is saying that. The vast majority of Georgians support the absentee ballot voter ID element. 75+% of Georgians. So that's a multiracial coalition of voters who support that reform. We're always going to have a little bit of differences. I agree. I support efforts to make access available. If there's anything that it becomes logistically impossible, I'm in favor of changing it. But what no one can defend is the Jim Crow 2.0 rhetoric. That is outrageous. It is not true. It has not been backed up. It is insulting to the history of that word to say that, you can't hand out water bottles in a line 150 feet from the precinct, and that's Jim Crow 2.0. All of that was overblown. And so a lot of my snarkiness is because of the snarkiness about the Democratic record toward a law that at the end of the day, what it really did was implement voter ID for absentee ballots. That was the big change in it, put some regulations around the drop boxes, as you mentioned.
County Election Board proposed many changes this go round shortly before the election. A lot of them didn't go into effect, but sparked concern among Democrats who did not have a whole lot of faith in the system. Do you think that's what kept them away from the polls this time, Tharon?
Well, Norm, thank you for being a Falcons fan. For those of you all who listen, I try to ride for these Falcons every single week. B-Rob loved his dogs, and I love the dogs too. I'm from Athens. I always tease him. He paid a lot of money to go to UGA, and I grew up there for
Hope paid a lot of money for me to go to UGA.
Yeah, good old Hope Scholarship.
Yeah, I'm going to Jacksonville.
But no, Norm, thank you for your question, and thank you for doing that. But I want to just touch on that for a second. I think that the respect that I have for Brian Lisa is his ability to defend himself and really not back down from that question. I mean, that's what we do, because I'm sure I get questions. I got one on Monday that was really tough, and Brian sat there. He's probably like, "Uh-oh, how is he going to answer this?" and just big thank you to Jennifer and Scotty and everyone, Lily, and definitely you, Lisa, for allowing us to come on here and give our opinion, because we don't make friends all the time. We actually make enemies. People disagree with us, and so but Norm, definitely, I think that. Just to kind of piggyback on, I'm going to get to your question. The Republicans changed the law because they got beat. I mean, that's just simple as that. I mean, we have been working under their guidelines for a long time. We just figured out how to do three things better than them. We finally started sending, people absentee ballots early, right? Application. Brad Raffensperger did something that he got criticized for. Mm-hmm. He sent a absentee ballot application to every active voter. Mm-hmm. And Democrats, we were like, oh my God, like we need to know who these people are. Like who sent these applications in. Second thing we did, we utilized the drop boxes. When people were making excuses, COVID, hey, I don't want to go outside. Well, hey, you know what? Let's just drop it off at this drop box. And then the third thing was, honestly, we really figured out that early voting, even though they reduced the hours in some cases, you had to get our people out. And then you see the Republicans doing that now. All right, let's talk about this Georgia election board. Lisa, this was something that really made Georgia be in the national spotlight again for a negative reason. Here we are, had two new members of this election board who came on, Trump, supporters, right? I mean, because Trump pointed them out at the rally and just created unnecessary chaos. Now, I'm a big proponent of good trouble. There's a difference between good trouble and unconsciously, well, I think this was conscious, intentional chaos to a process that even Republicans said. Brian's old boss, right? And I can say it now because he said it publicly. Former Governor Nathan Deal said at an event that Brian and I were at downtown that you don't change elections laws this close to the election. Mm-hmm. So they went against Democrats, lawyers, Lisa. I think a Republican person filed a lawsuit that got upheld. Yep. So it was a tactic that they were using to attack democracy. They wanted to create chaos and confusion. And what they're really doing, Lisa, and I'm just going to warn this crowd, I hope I'm wrong, but November 6th is just as important as November 5th. What we got to be prepared for as Democrats is that when we win, that they're going to say, well, how is that possible? All these Republicans voted early, and they didn't count the ballots. We just heard about absentee ballots being burned in other states. Norm just gave a very, I think, a sort of anecdotal sort of experience where we can do better. And I think Brian agrees with that, right? So I'm worried that no matter the election outcome, because of the voting has just been so high, and it's not because of Republicans, it's because of Democrats too. We register people just like Republicans. And but I just think that the intensity in the education of people wanting to vote in this race is so important. But no, what this election board tried to do, Lisa, was dangerous. And so shout out to, let's call their names. I'm going to call people's names today. Thomas Cox, I think Judge McBurney had a deal with it. These Fulton County judges who said, you know what, this is not true. And then shout out to my boy Mike Boggs, who is a Georgia Supreme Justice, and others who said, no, we're not going to allow these disruptors to try to change this law. And then also, I'm gonna say this, shout out to Chris Carr, an Attorney General. I do like Republicans, you all, believe it or not. But he stood up to the best of his ability. He could have went a little further, but he's running for governor one day, and he kind of gave an opinion. But I do think that people thought that Governor Kemp could have stepped in, Lisa, and did something. But I think that ultimately the governor, like he always does, let the process kind of play itself out. And I'll say this real quick. Shout out to B-Rob, who actually did say that he didn't believe that this was going to hold up in court. And that was very brave of him to say this at a time where there was clearly a movement to try to implement these laws.
Yeah,
changes.
Timing was everything, right? Laura Mitchell, your question, please.
Hi.
Can you wait for the mic,
Get your mic.
please, so we can capture you on tape?
Okay, thank you again, and I know it's difficult to be on the hot seat, especially for Brian, because I think the crowd here goes more or less a certain way.
I'm used to it. After 9 years.
Don't feel sorry for him.
Well,
I've gone some places where I've been yelled at.
Yeah.
About somebody who's now in Congress. Actually.
Right.
So I am a second-generation Hispanic American. All four of my grandparents immigrated here from Mexico back in the 1920s. So that being said, I also was around during the time of Nixon and saw how it was both parties who felt that what he had done during Watergate was so abhorrent that he was forced out of office. Fast forward to now, and I want to understand the moral decline of the Republican Party is what I see it, because I have seen that man insult my people and call them rapists and murderers and mentally challenged and, coming out of mental institutions. And why? Why is he saying these things? To get votes? I understand that. I don't understand why so many Republicans who are normally good people would want someone who's a convicted felon, who's a misogynist, a racist, says these things. I don't understand how the person with the first drop of Hispanic blood would vote for that man who has said these horrible things about my people. I don't know anyone that fits his description. So please tell me why there are Hispanics that vote for him. I know this. And why Republicans in general have thought it's okay to put a convicted felon in the White House. And if that had been a Democrat, imagine if Kamala Harris had been a convicted felon, or if she had been convicted of sexual abuse. How would the Republicans have reacted to that?
So you're undecided in the election?
Thank you.
You're going to think it out?
Is it just a statement against Kamala Harris? Some people think it's just a statement against Kamala Harris. They really don't support Trump, but it's just a statement against Kamala Harris.
That is one segment of it, but you started like 30, 35, maybe closer to 40% of Americans who just like Donald Trump for whatever reason. And you mentioned something about Latino voters voting for Trump. We have seen the Latino vote in the country go from 65%, 70% Democrat over the last generation to close to 50-50. The reason why the Republicans control the U.S. House is because several Hispanic-dominated districts in Florida and Texas went Republican, giving Republicans the margin of their majority, essentially. So that 50-50, well, I think part of it is Trump has spoken to a lot of that vote that has come is a working class vote. And we've seen a realignment of the Democrats becoming a more highly educated electorate. A lot of white old Republicans have now become Democrats. They're no longer up for grabs. Those Nikki Haley folks are people who are like have one toe left in the Republican Party. They want to be Republicans, but they feel like they're in no man's land. I know a lot of those people. A lot of my demographic is in that. They feel like they're in that no man's land. But that economic working class appeal, like stuff like having the Teamsters president speak at the Republican convention, that kind of blew my mind. You're talking about something for like that's not speaking my language, right? But he is speaking to a part of the electorate that is out there, and some of those voters are Latino voters. So I think that some of the Republican rhetoric toward family values, a respect for faith, a plan for working class Americans, these are things that are touching parts of that Latino coalition. When it comes to the convicted felon thing, let me tell you, Republicans reject that wholly, just as Democrats would if Kamala Harris had been convicted in Cheyenne, Wyoming, or Boise, Idaho, or Waycross, Georgia, right? They'd be like, oh, well, it's a partisan jury with a partisan prosecutor going after a Democrat. So if you look at those charges in New York City that he was convicted on, there are a lot of Democratic bigwigs like David Axelrod, who I think is one of the most brilliant tacticians and political minds in America, and a friend of Tharon's. By the way, I want to meet him. If you can tell him, I really want to meet him. But
no problem, bro.
He was like this
after the election.
And he's like, this is prosecutorial overreach. He didn't use those words, but he was like, they were going after Trump in that New York case on stuff they had never prosecuted before. And it's not going to hold up on appeal. The case by Fani Willis is crumbling by the day. Burt Jones was supposed to be indicted. Another court stepped in and was like, there's no crime committed here. Well, if he didn't commit a crime, then a lot of these other co-indictees didn't commit a crime. So Republicans see lawfare, that's a word that Marjorie Taylor Greene used Monday at the rally, prosecutorial overreach, politics by prosecution. So they reject that wholly. And I hear this from Democrats all the time. And I give Kamala Harris credit because of what I just said, Republicans and a lot of independents just think this is partisan. Like they're going after a political enemy, somebody that they hate. Because they think that, I think Kamala Harris has realized that calling him a felon and going that angle wouldn't work politically because too many Americans reject it. And that's the danger for the justice system, that so many people have that little faith in it. I think as an American, that worries me, and I think there's a little bit of blame to go around on that.
Tiki Wormuth and Chris Cooper, We can get 2 more questions in.
Hi. I guess along those lines of what you said, do you think we can, and this is for both of you, do you think we can ever get back to a time when all candidates respect the office that they're running for and the constituents that they're serving? And if you think we ever could, how do you think we can get there?
Well, the first step is what we're doing right now. Again, just huge thank you to WABE for allowing Brian and I to every single week, and we drive Lisa crazy, because what you guys don't hear is the conversations we have off the air. Brian and I spend so much time together during the election season. Actually, we spend more time together sometimes than we spend with our spouses. Yeah. And that's true.
That's true.
And so, look, it's been rocky. I've developed this reputation at WABE. Watch Tharon. If he starts going off on certain things, just leave him alone for about 3 weeks. He'll be fine. Brian won't even participate in the conference call because he's like, I don't want to get attacked. But you always got to come back.
He's telling the truth.
And that's true. and leadership is in the bag, right? But what we do is that we have respect for each other. And I think that first and foremost, it's Brian, Lisa, and I's responsibility to, even when we say things, just like he answered your question, answered Norm's question, right? You have a right to ask your question, and he has a right to respond. But let's get to the candidates. So I want to answer that question. Look, Donald Trump not only destroyed the Republican Party and what it was, he actually changed politics in the world. We had never seen anything like him before. And the fact that in 2016, when he would say those things that you talked about, coming down that escalator, and it hasn't stopped. It's actually gotten worse. And so Brian always says something that really kind of, I think about it, and then he said that there was a sector of people in 2016 who wanted change, right? They wanted a Donald Trump. And I think a lot of it started off because we as Americans, we were spoiled by Barack Hussein Obama, this black man who the only criticism you could have for him was that he wore a tan suit to a press briefing one day. I mean, seriously, another thing. I mean, really, they can't say anything else about him, right? And so we have been spoiled for 8 years of a man with character, with integrity, who loved his wife, who only had one wife.
No girlfriends.
Wasn't doing all the things that Trump was doing. And so I think that there was a sector of people that we miss as Democrats that wanted something different. And Donald Trump destroyed all of his Republican opponents because they missed it too in 2016. So we're going to get past this election. I think Donald Trump is going to lose, and you won't see him in political campaigns or offices anymore. Now the Republican Party are going to have to rebuild and find somebody better. But Democrats, here we go, newsflash. When Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are president and vice president, we still have a little bit of elitism in our party. We got to talk about this war in Gaza. We're split on that. All right, I'm just going to take it. We got to talk about wage inequality. We got to talk about maternal mortality. We got to talk about how you have people who are just only focused on their one issue and they won't support candidates unless they do it right. And we cannot be a party that has 90+%, Lisa, African American women who support this party, and black men, which we haven't talked about today, is the second largest group, and they still feel like they're not being heard. So both parties have got a lot of work to do, but I do think we would get better candidates moving forward. And we got some great elected officials here in Georgia, and we're very blessed to have some Republicans and Democrats that I think are really good people.
I'll say this, because we started this show, and it is a testament to respect and patience, because we get on each other's nerves sometimes, obviously, because we're dealing with very intense things. And we also, it's not just what we say on the show. Like, he goes back and has to face a Democratic base. I've got to go back and face a Republican base. They're like, why are you conceding so much about the party? And I'm sure he gets the same thing when he compliments Republicans, which he does. I don't know how we fix that. But we started this show because we wanted to model civil conversation where people aren't screaming at each other, even if you fundamentally disagree. And this isn't an ideological difference, but obviously he has a different thought process on who's going to this election than I do. I think Trump's going to win it, and he thinks Kamala Harris is going to win it. So we have a difference here. But I'm not going to go to bed tonight thinking, God, he is so stupid. How in the world does he think that she's going to win in Pennsylvania, right? That's not how this goes. Here's the thing. The system that we have, and this is sort of my political operative bias. People like me and Tharon don't tell you what to think. We tell you we reflect what you think. And the stuff that gets clicks is hateful. The stuff that gets retweets and reposted is hateful. The stuff that we respond to emotionally is the most toxic stuff. We as consumers are choosing this, right? Mm-hmm. And it is if you can go put out, why aren't we telling the good story? Go put out a good story. You're gonna be like no likes on your Twitter, right? Nobody cares. Nobody responds to good stuff, right? They just don't. Americans are choosing this. And as long as they choose, and this is true on the Democrat side and the Republican side, they go in and they vote in a primary, because it's our ideologues on both sides who choose our nominees. They go in and pick the guy or gal who says, I will never compromise. That other side wants to destroy us, and I will fight them every day. You see the word fight a lot in a primary campaign, because you want to tell the base that you're going to go and take it. You're going to own the libs, or you're going to call the Republicans Nazis. That's what they want to see. Americans are getting what they buy. We are stocking the shelves with what you buy. And I hate it. I hate it. And that's why I do this show. Mm-hmm. And I do get passionate about this thing. I get passionate about two things: civil discourse and the toxicity of American culture, and a $33 trillion debt that nobody seems to give one hoot about.
Talk about culture. Social media and politics just do not mix. They just do not mix. Chris Cooper, our last question this morning.
Awesome. Well, good morning. Thank you both for awesome discussion so far. As a native Philadelphian originally, I have a lot calling my mom, make sure everybody votes up there. And now being here in Atlanta, I decided this year to actually be a poll worker. And that was because of what I saw happen last time. Mm-hmm. And so I'm thinking about, of course, the election and the anxiety that's been created across the board for everybody, right? Mm-hmm. And specifically to you, Brian, as you think about, there's going to be a world post-Trump, right? I mean, if he wins, which I hope he doesn't, but there has to be a world post-Trump, right? Yeah. So because you are so connected to the Republican base and what's actually happened, what is the rebuild plan for that party right now? Like what does that even look like? Because you just mentioned a minute ago that consumers are buying this hate and all other kind of stuff, and I really believe Trump has a lot to do with that. About why people have changed, because I remember other elections where it was not as contentious and not as belligerent and demeaning and all those types of things. So what is the actual, or do you know, or have an inkling as to what is the rebuild for the Republican, regardless if he wins or not, which once again, I hope he doesn't. But what does that look like?
Yeah. This is funny. Tharon and I spoke to Dr. Bullock's class at the University of Georgia 3 weeks ago, and it was a great class. I mean, wicked smart kids, they were like so engaged about what was happening in their country, and so thoughtful. And all the questions went to Tharon, and I was like, this is so awesome, because that must mean there are a lot of Republicans in this audience, because Democrats always ask me questions and the Republicans always ask him questions. It's like they're seeing an exotic animal in the zoo that they don't come across in their daily lives, right? Like, oh, here's my chance to talk to somebody who believes all this stupid stuff, So it really is a good indicator of, when I get the questions, I know what we're dealing with.
But did you think with his brother, this black man stood up? You pretty much knew he was.
I was coming to me. Yeah, I knew. Yeah.
But before he answers, thank you for being a poll worker on both our outlets. Definitely on Political Breakfast. Thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Because so many people did not want to do it. Yeah. So many people did not want to do it.
I would feel. I would feel endangered to some degree. Yeah. We're in such a weird time, right? Yeah. And we are seeing some antics around the state of people pulling hijinks to prove that there's fraud and that kind of stuff. I mean, that's really scary. These are nuts. And
so I de-escalated the situation a little bit. Y'all like what I did there? So I complimented the brother, gave him a little more time. So now he's not.
I would say, but I love getting questions from black men, because y'all are the most moderate faction of the Democratic Party, and so. I have more like commonality talking with black men on policy than I do with white liberals, for sure. I see it across the board. It's just an observation, which is why so many now are voting Republican, I would say. So what comes, no, for real. It's true. That's true.
Here he comes. Here he comes.
How much time do we have?
No, it's true.
It's a false flag. Let me just say this, all right? I got my boy Toro. I got Frank in the building. I know a lot of my friends here. It's a false flag that you got all these black male Republicans out there. Let me just address this. Sisters with an A. Y'all have been very critical. No, this is causing some divide. Let me tell you, black women are pulling me by the arm and saying, y'all better vote, right? And so I want to say this on this podcast. We are going to show up for this black woman and this white man, Tim Walz and Kamala Harris, and vote. Now, what has happened, though, and Brian is evidence of this, I have conservative black men in my family. I have some Republicans, right? Republican friends. But it's a difference between being a Republican and conservative and being a Trump supporter. And I just want to point that out. So brothers have gotten a little bit of brothers have gotten a little bit of unfair negative treatment, but we can't whine about it because black women have been enduring so much and has showed up. So I want to say that we're going to be fine, Lisa. Now, am I concerned about it? Brian knows something I don't know, but I think that when the numbers come out, we're going to stand up for this woman.
Right,
Yeah.
let's get this black gentleman's question answered about anxiety.
I'm sorry. Yeah,
About anxiety.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
That was some identity politics. That was totally unfair. We just talked about black men. Could you ask a question? So what happens after Trump? I think the personalities change dramatically. What we've seen is that the Trump model of that the rhetoric that he uses, the type of humor that he uses. I know Democrats don't see it as humor, but Republicans do, right? This is a huge divide. Like the screaming headlines in the New York Times or MSNBC, like, another outrage. This is the end of Trump. Nope, this is going to be finally the one that brings him down. And Republicans see it as funny quite often. And it took a long time for me to kind of realize that was what the pattern was. But no one who's tried to mimic him has been able to do it and win. If you look at the people who have followed the model as closely as possible, they have lost their races. That's why the Democrats control the U.S. Senate, because of the candidates that were nominated by the Republicans who were mimicking Trump in Pennsylvania and Arizona in 2022, for example. So what he does is unique to him, and he is Teflon in a way that I have never seen in politics. Like every day, I don't even know how to, after 9 years of this, I don't know how to even answer the question, like, okay, so the floating island of trash, right? Isn't this going to bring him down? No rules seem to apply when it comes to him. I do not see that as being true. If you look at who's next in the Republican Party, let's look at our own governor, Brian Kemp. I think he is a model. He's not necessarily the guy. I don't know. Maybe he is the guy. But he is the model of what the next generation looks like. He's somebody who can speak to the conservative base. He's somebody who has cross-partisan appeal because we saw it in Georgia. You don't get to the rate of percentage that he got in 2022 without bringing a lot of independents, some Democrats, a multiracial coalition in a state that's now majority minority. So I think Brian Kemp actually is a model of what we might see. I do think that we see pendulum swings in America, and I think that, and maybe this is just my heart talking more than my head, but I think having a strong, coherent, conservative party that's got a vision for the future is important for this country. I'm equally interested to see what happens to the Democrats. I was listening to some Democrats on a podcast this morning as I was getting dressed, and they were saying Donald Trump is the glue that holds together the Republican coalition, but Donald Trump is the glue that holds together the Democratic coalition, because the Democrats are united by their hatred of Trump. And if Kamala Harris wins, it is that is what unites Democrats, that in a nation of 330 million people, very diverse views within that coalition, they're united by him.
Answer your question?
I get that you're hopeful that it'll be more like a Brian Kemp moving forward, but I think that where we are now, it just I don't know, and I know that a lot of you mentioned the thing about the Republicans specifically having very high turnout so far. But, I've never seen this many Republicans break for Democrats, specifically for Kamala Harris, like this before. So I believe that I'm a numbers guy. I went to Morehouse and Georgia Tech and all that kind of stuff. And I did math and industrial engineering and all those things. So numbers do matter to me. And if that large, subset of individuals that came out to do early votes that are Republicans, if even 20% of them are moving more Democratic, that changes your argument. So, I think that's why I'm just curious, like, what is the plan for the Republican Party moving forward?
Well, very quickly, I don't want to take up too much time, but there is a realignment going on. Yes,
Okay.
some of those
Okay,
people
so
who
there
are
is
in
a
your
realignment.
focus group, probably some white college-educated folks, for example, who used to be Republicans are becoming Democrats, but they're already Democrats. They didn't decide that in 2024. This has been going on for 8 years. So a lot of that's already baked in. But you're also seeing, as we discussed here, some parts of the old Democratic coalition, union members, some level of Latino and Black voters, similar to Latino, Asian American voters have gone from being solidly Democratic to a little more 50-50. Very important in this state where those two demographics are growing very rapidly in North Fulton and in Gwinnett particularly. So yes, Democrats are getting some folks, but they're losing some other folks. And so it's constantly moving, and it's, at some juncture, like, it's going to impact me, right? I'm not in favor of tariffs. I'm a free market conservative. Mm-hmm. I want consumers to pay lower prices. I want to have foreign markets open up for American producers. I don't want to protect our industry too much because then we quit innovating. The last time that we had a steel patent in this country was 1971. Just happens to be when we put up tariffs on American steel to keep out foreign competition. When we put those walls around this country, we quit being what makes America great. We are innovators. We are leaders in the world, and we've got to keep that competitive edge. So if Republicans are moving toward like a party of tariffs, a party that's more insular, like, I think that we're getting a good value arming Ukraine and letting them go kill Russians so that we don't have to. I think it's a good deal for us, And my views aren't necessarily the majority views in my party anymore.
And that concludes. You just set us up for another edition of a live edition of Political Breakfast. Moving into next week, how are y'all feeling about the state of Georgia? You feeling pretty good? We will be live on the air next Wednesday morning after Tuesday's election. So you'll hear more insight from these two great guys. So please give them a round of applause. Give yourselves a round of applause.
Thank y'all.
We were so honored to have you here for this edition of
That was great.
Political Breakfast Live. Thank you.
Thank y'all so much.